Has Ukraine received its last check from the American taxpayers? Well, according to John Kirby, a national security spokesperson, the aid to Ukraine is not indefinite. Let's check out what he said the other day.
On the Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope. I mean, today we announced $200 million, and we'll keep that aid going as long as we can, but it's not going to be indefinite. So are we moving with a sense of alacrity? Absolutely. I couldn't give you a date certain on the calendar.
Ooh, not indefinite is a real change of tone from the language that's been used up until this point about funding for Ukraine.
I wonder if that New York Times columnist, Tom Friedman, who we played a clip from him the other day, who said even to have any willingness to shut off Ukraine funding is like evil. He used very stark language, is morally evil. Is he going to use that kind of language for John Kirby? Conceding something that you and I and so many skeptics have been saying forever, which is that eventually we will stop sending money. That is the reality. We're not going to fund this forever, even though the Biden administration has said that they would do that it would come to an end. So doesn't it behoove us to push for and work for a diplomatic outcome at the point where the Ukrainian resistance is still funded, rather than wait for that to peter out, as it eventually will do, and then they'll be in probably a worse bargaining position with Russia. Yeah, so many of us have been saying that, but cooler heads would not prevail.
It really highlights how deeply negligent the U.S. and Western allies that thwarted early peace attempts were, knowing that they were only going to be able to keep the float of Ukraine's war machine afloat for a limited period of time. I do think that the funding demands of the crisis in Israel-Palestine is squeezing the U.S. military a little bit. There was a statement made, maybe it was by Antony Blinken, that it can do both. But I think the way that you're seeing people change their rhetoric and the way that you've seen the emphasis shift from Ukraine to Israel over the course of the past week is telling a very different story. And I think it probably is also not irrelevant to the Biden administration that it's looking at really terrible poll numbers in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan that it needed to win in 2020, losing by almost double digits. You know, not margin of error numbers, but 7, 8, 9%.
Really, yeah, terrible is understating it, frankly. These are the worst numbers he's ever had versus Trump in these states. It was not like this for the last election. I'd be real worried.
And looking at the public opinion around the war in Ukraine and seeing that that is not an issue that helps Joe Biden, I do wonder if that's finally having an impact.
Speaking of issues that won't help anybody, Lindsey Graham, the most hawkish voice within the Republican Party, he had this to say in response to the ongoing crisis in Israel vis-a-vis Hamas, that we should actually bomb Iran. Let's play it.
What I would do is I would bomb Iran's oil infrastructure. The money financing terrorism comes from Iran. It's time for this terrorist state to pay a price for financing and supporting all this chaos. Yes, if you're the Iranians, if it were up to me, this war escalates, I'm coming after you.
So if it weren't already enough that Israel is in the process with American state money backing it of leveling Gaza, he also wants to provoke a war with Iran.
To be fair to Lindsey Graham, he's wanted to start a war with Iran independent of anything else happening anywhere in the world. It's like, oh, it's raining today, we should start a war with Iran.
It is pretty incredible that those kinds of comments and the massive global implications of those comments and the implications for the U.S. budget, which these kind of classic conservative budget hawks used to say they cared so much about, go completely out of the window, and they make these kind of statements with impunity. Even if you put the humanitarian implications of what he said to the side, it's really galling that we do live in a political context. People say, oh, there's no accountability for Trump. Trump is just the tip of the iceberg. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of pushback or consequences for people making even the most outlandish of policy suggestions.
Well, one person who is pushing back from within the GOP, Senator Rand Paul, he said this, encouraging restraint on the subject. Let's play it.
You do. You know, I have nothing but sympathy for the Israeli people at this point in time. I think that the primary objective at this time has to be to get the people that attacked them. They were in Gaza. Before we think about spreading this to the rest of the world, maybe we ought to think about exactly what's going on the ground there. I do think that there is immediate reaction sometimes to let's get everybody who's responsible. And without question, Iran had their hands in this. But you remember after 9/11, there were people who wanted to attack Iraq. They said Iraq caused 9/11. Turned out Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11. So let's see where the facts lie. Let's investigate this and let Israel need to do what they need to do, which is to have a punishing response to the people in Gaza to say no more. We're not going to let this happen again.
When you follow the money, if the money...
So also, I'm not sure if it was that clip or it might have been a different clip with Rand Paul, he also pointed out, responding to calls to bomb Iran's nuclear capabilities, that and Rand Paul was just being very frank with the viewers, the American people, like the cat's out of the bag. You can't like totally just reset their nuclear capabilities. Part of it is knowledge that they've already accrued. The materials can be hidden and are very small. Like just blowing up the facilities is not going to even accomplish necessarily the goal of devastating their nuclear program. So I'm glad to see, again, the GOP is not. There's not unanimity on a lot of issues, including foreign policy. So I wanted to contrast, Lindsey Graham's hawkishness with what I suspect is a more popular view, maybe not among Republican elites, I don't know, but among the actual base of the party.
Yeah, I do appreciate Paul there pointing to the need to base foreign policy decisions on facts. I mean, we just talked about how President Biden spewed a completely unconfirmed rumor about the existence of 40 beheaded Israeli children from the podium, something that had to be retracted. I think the retraction in and of itself and the embarrassment that it causes for Biden points to the likelihood that the rumor is false, right? If he could have called up Israel and said, hey, can you just show me the picture real quick and make it so that I wasn't a liar? I think that would have happened. So the retraction, I think, does really speak volumes. And people in that, reflecting on that moment that just happened last night, are being reminded of the testimony of babies, incubator babies being thrown out of window from a Kuwaiti young woman, which was used to justify our engagement in the Gulf War in the 90s. And people are really advising caution, saying oftentimes lies and rumors about the quote-unquote barbarity of a people is used to dehumanize them and justify attacks that are unsupported by our geopolitical interests or facts on the ground. And cooler heads must prevail and not fall for every preconceived notion that conforms with whatever ideals you have about a group that you don't like, because ultimately we have seen in history over and over and over again where that brings us as a nation.
Right. I think there was one more subject we wanted to touch on here. Do you want to intro
speaking
that?
Of unconfirmed rumors, there was another brouhaha where a celebrity decided to weigh in and show their support for Israel. But just like Jamie Lee Curtis did with the pictures of the babies in cages that turned out to be Palestinian babies in cages, not Israeli babies in cages, he tweeted a picture saying, "I stand with Israel," of devastated terrain, which unsurprisingly was a picture of Gaza devastated. When this was pointed out to him, he removed the image and replaced it with an image that had no background, just a color with the words "praying for Israel" still on top of it. No follow-up saying that he was also showing any sympathy for the people who were actually pictured in the devastation that initially incited his sympathies.
Do you remember when Justin Bieber visited the Anne Frank house?
No. What did he do?
He wrote in the guest book that I hope that Anne Frank would have been a believer.
No.
That's a true story.
Yikes. Well, thank goodness we aren't looking to Justin Bieber for any kind of foreign policy advice or...
Maybe hair tips.
Maybe hair tips. Great music. What can I say? But hopefully he stays out of politics going forward. Stick around. We'll have more Rising for you after this.